are live. All right, good morning, everybody. Apologize for the delay. Some errors on my part, sharing the wrong link. But we are live on YouTube. We have some folks that are attending via webinar. If you are on as an attendee, please feel free to use the Q&A. We'll do our best to monitor that and send any questions to the folks that are presenting today. So this is our second public meeting here in September 2022, so super exciting. HousingStat is a piece of a larger priority stat program. And the whole purpose of priority stat is really to foster an environment of accountability and collaboration through an established framework for measuring performance on the mayor's highest priorities. And so what are those priorities? Important to know. We'll come up, there we go. So first being public safety. Second is protecting our city from flooding and sea level rise. Why we're here today, attainable and affordable housing in the city, mobility, so our transportation infrastructure, economic empowerment to build inclusivity as well as equity, and then of course quality of life. Now, HousingStat, our kind of mission is to ensure an adequate supply of safe, quality housing options for all of our citizens. That's kind of our overarching theme with the HousingStat program. Collaboration is the key. So again, this is not by department. So we've got multiple departments that are represented as part of the team. BFRC, the executive office, HCD, IT and GIS, livability, and planning, preservation, and sustainability. So just quick review over our KPIs for HousingStat. Number one is create and maintain vibrant, diverse, and safe neighborhoods. The second is to increase the supply of low-income, affordable, and workforce housing. And the percentages there are AMI for the Charleston area. 3 is to decrease the number of individuals experiencing homelessness. And 4 is to improve the regulatory environment to reduce barriers to housing production. So how do we get out of the way as much as possible? Transparency is also really important. Obviously, why we have these public meetings, providing a hybrid environment so people can attend in their pajamas and bunny slippers if they would like to and still interact with us. But this is also being streamed live to YouTube so that people can come back and watch it at their leisure. We also are working hard to, as we grow and mature in this program, we'll be providing all of the data on our website as well, so that citizens can also track our progress right along with us. So just really quickly, this is a journey, right? And so, how do we kind of go from just, tracking widgets, if you will, to actually understanding what's happening and start to make recommendations and be proactive in our work, and so that we're again, not just tracking things and trying to understand what happened, but really get to why it happened and be the proactive side. So that's kind of what we're headed towards. So today, I think there's some really good information that we're gonna hear about. Some great work. Talk about some blight code violations. Time to approve market and affordable housing projects. Affordable housing units created and preserved, as well as looking at the dollars contributed to the city's affordable housing fund and what that kind of landscape looks like. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy and Kelvin to talk about some blight code violations.
So I wanted to start by asking what you think blight is. So this is our interactive portion of the meeting. So what do you consider to be blight? Anyone?
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It looks bad.
Right. So in our next slide, we have some images that illustrate some of the blight that we may see around the city, overgrown yards. We have a tarp hanging in a tree in someone's yard. Another home that's barely visible through the overgrowth, graffiti, abandoned homes, litter along the street. So all of these are examples of blight. We won't focus on the vacant buildings today. We're focusing more on the things that can be cleaned up a little faster. So if you could go to the next slide. I wanted to also talk to you before we get into the details of blight. You know, how does this relate to affordable housing? Blight can cause, health and safety hazards. It can also bring an increase in crime to a neighborhood, but it can also cause some social problems within a community. Blighted properties can create a decrease in surrounding property values, and this can lead to either underappraisal or and a gap in the appraisals, which makes it difficult to get mortgages approved. So that impacts affordable housing. And just reducing blight can go a long way in keeping a healthy balance in the neighborhood. Blight is very costly to a community. If you think about it, we have a whole department in which half of our staff focus on these types of issues. So blight is costly to cities through administrative cost, legal, and staff labor cost. Another cost to the city is a loss of tax revenue for these properties as those property values decrease in an area. So we have, in order to assist with these affordable housing goals, we have a goal of reducing the number of days to resolve these blight code violations. Currently, 90% of blight code violations are resolved between 10 and 30 days. We would like, by the end of next year, 2023, to remedy these blight issues closer to 10 days or less instead of 10 to 30. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, Kelvin's going to assist in some of the various types of violations that we find. So Kelvin, if you would talk to us maybe about 14-5, duty of owner to keep the property clean, and maybe public nuisance, like how those differ and what those things mean.
Okay. 14-5, the owner's responsibility to keep the property clean, basically puts a burden on the property owner to bring the property into compliance or keep it into compliance. And so keeping the lawn mowed or the litter, make sure there's no litter. These are the kinds of things that we can see as we patrol the neighborhoods. The problem we have with that, though, you have a significant number of, an increasing number of elderly people who are unable, either physically or financially, to get this done. And that impacts the amount of time from the time we give them a notice until the issue is resolved. And so I've even dealt with Jamie Roper in seeing if there's some type of way to help some of these elderly people. Even I've spoken with churches, and there seems to be nothing there that's actually in place to help them. That helps us to reduce the numbers, and so that's one impact. Now, that's 14-5, the owner responsibility to keep the property clean. 2152, public nuisance. Public nuisance is, it can be any hazard that impacts the public, from low-hanging tree branches to palmetto branches coming over the sidewalk, which impacts wheelchair accessibility, children walking to school. So we do a fairly good job at dealing with those, because sometimes we just have to pull up with the truck and chop it ourselves. But some of these issues, it's really the property owner's responsibility. Some of the property owners are Delaware corporations. And we're never gonna get in touch with them until they're ready to get in touch with us. And so so we try to get them to resolve these issues, and when we can't, that's when we finally have to go ahead and deal with it ourselves. So those are two of the areas that we deal with, public nuisance and the owner responsibility.
And then there are two others that are a little more direct. 14-32, abandoned vehicles in the yard. And then 14-46, which is improper put out of trash or garbage.
In the residential area.
In the residential areas, right. So these, Kelvin's mentioned some of the barriers to decreasing those numbers of days.
Resolution days.
Right. So one of the things he didn't mention is, we may not get compliance with a simple warning, verbal or written. Sometimes people just are reluctant to do it. So these things can escalate to a court summons. That takes far more time to resolve an issue. So while we do get most of our compliance through warnings, we do have to go through that court process as well. Obviously, we would prefer to handle them more on a warning basis, no fines, that sort of thing. But they do sometimes take a little longer with the courts. So I just wanted to give you a few examples. Out of 92 cases, 14-5, which is the duty of owner to keep the property clean, 11 of those escalated to a summons. So about 12% of them had to go to court to be resolved. And these are coming in at about a 24-day average for the year. But we are, managing to keep 90% of them under 30 days still.
Or like, are some of those, or do you guys have a sense of like, are those that, I think what Kelvin alluded to, is there's kind of this gap there, right? So we've got like people who just they're struggling as it is, and that's kind of, they need help, right?
Right.
And so is it kind of that box, or is it people that maybe don't live there? Those, okay.
Yes, and so you'll see with some of the items that we present about how we might achieve these goals that rental properties, people that simply need a help and they can't do it on their own. And, especially with those that need some sort of assistance, going the route of a summons just puts them in a worse situation than is necessary. But sometimes that's the only thing that gets their attention, to take care of it. Anything else you want to add?
So,
Can I pop in really
Of
quick?
course.
Another one that a lot of people don't realize are mental illness with some property owners, hoarders. The yards are, you can imagine what the inside is like at the outside. It's just, everything comes home. That's very sensitive, dealing with people with that mental illness. So obviously that impacts the time it can take to resolve the case. Those linger because human nature tells you to be a little more kinder and gentler when you're dealing with that aspect of the community. But that is a big part of it, because you want to be sensitive, you want to try to find the means, you want to try to, and another a roadblock is government, to be honest with you, dealing with the mental counselors, mental health counselors in the government. There's many protocols in place where they want to get involved, but they say, no, it doesn't classify, it doesn't meet that level. So that's
threshold.
right,
Yeah.
doesn't meet their threshold to, that's not mental illness, they're not suicidal, they're not gonna, do harm to anybody, so therefore we back out. It's one of our biggest frustrations, especially for 12 Gordon Street, downtown. We've been dealing with it for years. Kelvin's been personally involved, and it's still not where we need it to be. So that, I just wanted to throw that in there. That is another factor with these cases and the time it takes to resolve them.
Yes, definitely. public nuisance cases, sometimes those are a little bit more involved than just the duty of owner. We have fewer of those, but they tend to take a little longer. And of the 32 cases, 6 of those have gone to court this year. Abandoned vehicles, again, those can take a little longer. You have to make arrangements to get it towed away, and people are a little more reluctant to get rid of their property or find a new location for it. Those don't go to court as often, but we've had 4 this year. And then improper put out, that's, people putting their trash out too soon or too late, or leaving their can on the street all of the time. We have quite a few of those. Mostly it does feel like it's rental property, especially on the peninsula with college students renting properties. It's rare that those go to court, but they do. We've had a few cases this year, about 4 of them. And those, it's not a one-time thing. The ones that go to court, it's multiple offenses and never taking care of it properly. But obviously, those are resolved usually that day or the next day, unless they end up in court. So one of the things that you're probably all aware of because it's currently going through council. One of the things that would really speed things up for us when we're dealing with rental properties is having the appropriate person to contact when we do have these blight situations on rental properties. So, the city has proposed to create this rental registration program that'll assist us in having better access to the right contacts. And I believe it was deferred the other night, but hopefully it will be passed this year.
We're gonna get there.
Yes. So another thing that we were looking at to try to achieve this goal is to develop guidelines to address repeat offenders. And we would like to work on that through next year and hopefully have, a strategy to deal with these folks. And then a more recent thing that we've been discussing is how do we assist those people that need help? Maybe they're elderly or have a mental illness and they simply can't get these things done. So we would like to explore any programs or opportunities there may be to help. There are times when, our staff assist. Dan will ask one of us to go and cut some branches down or to mow a lawn, but that's, probably not the best way in the end. Like there may be other avenues that we can explore. So we'd like to look into those things. So do you have any questions for us? Yes.
I'll pipe in if I may. I really like the idea of exploring programs to help those who are bona fide financial, distressed or mental illness related or whatever. So who qualifies those people? Who's going to be a factor? But it seems to me that some consortium of landscaping companies or church groups or some nonprofit enlist, but we'd have to vet like who qualifies, rather than having them go to help somebody who's capable but just not willing.
Well, and then that of course is also an issue. We had a case in court in just recent months that someone going through a very difficult time, their neighbor works for government nearby and knows all of the resources out there, and that neighbor tried to help by providing details about the programs for roof replacement, all sorts of things. But you have a resistance there. I know Emily's with us from housing understands that because of her work, but sometimes people don't want the help or they're not ready to take it. And so that'll create some difficulties too.
So there's a nonprofit that does, of course, we have our own rehab program, but there's a nonprofit that does home repairs. What's their name?
Oh,
Operation Home,
Operation Home.
Palmetto Cap, Charleston Habitat for Humanity,
Yeah,
all are organizations that we support.
yeah. But seems to me we should try to find somebody or create somebody that does that. And then on the other folks, it seems to me kind of on the really mini version of demolition by neglect, where we have the ability at some really extreme case to go in and make the repair and put a lien on the property. Why couldn't we have a mini similar thing where somebody just won't cut the weeds and do what they need to do, and you end up having to take them to court of having I know you've got kind of a SWAT team that can go out and just cut somebody's weed for them, right?
Yes.
Put $100 lien on it, and that sounds like a minimal amount to go through the legal trouble, but it seems to me that it would get somebody's attention that they get a lien on their property for $100, and eventually it would create some income to support the SWAT team, to be able to do more of that ourselves rather than, by the time you do the ticket, go to court, it still looks blighted all that time.
And it sat there for months because of it.
and the lien might be a less expensive route than going through
Definitely.
the court process as well. So even though you do have some legal resources at work, it might be less expensive and you actually dealt with the situation too. So
So that sounds simple, but it's probably very
Yeah.
complicated. It might be worth having legal support.
So does my with the group of clergy?
Oh, yeah.
Like I wonder, 'cause I know like our church, they do, it's part of like their local missions is they help people clean up their yard or do a roof repair. I wonder if there's a connection that Mike and the clergy group know about where it doesn't have to be government involved, but rather community-based.
So maybe we could form some sort of alliance where we can notify them when we may have a case that they could help us with.
Yeah. Might be some churches that know the people in the community or at least know the neighborhoods. And I'm trying to think about how we all help out. It's not just the government's responsibility.
That's right.
To really work as a community, because it also kind of goes back to the community trust that we've been talking about. Some members of our community might be more willing to take help or assistance or information from
Sure.
the local church rather than the city person coming to tell them something to organize.
Get Mike to forward that.
We would definitely appreciate it, because I know of elderly people who, and I've been with the city for years, and they've had immaculately, really beautiful lawns and stuff like this. Now they're elderly and nobody helped them. It was amazing. They told me that the people in their church won't help.
Yeah, I'm just curious what a court resolution typically looks like, or if it's really case by case.
It is case by case, and often if there is a hardship, the judge doesn't go the full fine or fine route. He may just give them an extended time period. Let's see you back here in 15 days or something like that, so that there's a little pressure on them to do it, but not that financial burden. Anything else?
Yeah, when it gets to that level, obviously you go before a judge, it's a little more onto the case, if you will, versus listening to us. And sometimes that authoritative judge figure saying, hey, let's get this done. You got another week, 2 weeks. So there's very minimal funds that come
From those
in
things.
relation to our court. For this part, this is short-term rentals. They bring in quite a bit of fun. But yeah, so but again, all this time is taken, right, to get it done. But there's a lot of factors, like.
Good stuff.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Amy, Kelvin, and Dan? Awesome. Great work, y'all. I think this is
Is
pretty
there a
good.
question?
Shannon.
Quick question, just thinking about sort of tracking and the different reasons for abandonment, and think about the image of the tarp and the abandoned vehicles. Have environmental factors been tracked as well? So are these increasing during a flood event? Is this something that would be sort of directly tied there? Just thinking of the flood center, there are ways to sort of vary some metrics across the different values.
No, we haven't tracked that. What do you think, just based on your experience out in the field, do you think that has any weight on why these things are occurring, or?
There are so many different, it's so many different variables. Again, you have some vehicles that, say a person who became elderly, they're no longer able to drive on St. Margaret Street. I had a similar situation, and the family members, they got him to stop driving, but he wouldn't allow them to get rid of the vehicle. And so you have these kinds of things. Then you have the person that's doing mechanic work in their yards, and say, no, I'm not, and come out of the house with the wrench in their hand and grease all over them. And so these are people that you're like, you're going to get summons, and because, so it can be anything in between. Yeah, so.
I think that bigger answer for you is flooding, probably not.
Mhm.
Environmentally, yeah, weather takes, shifts the gauge a little bit because our peak times are summer because grass is always growing and it's raining. That's a delay. I couldn't do it.
Because of rain.
So I wouldn't say flooding, but I would say environmental factors like the weather.
Guys, lots of good stuff there. I know y'all been working hard to do some stuff in Energov to get things tracked properly and whatnot. So that's great step one. So that's awesome. So let's switch gears a little bit. I think shift over to Chloe. Great. So you.
All right. So I'm going to be talking about our goal to reduce the review times for new market rate and affordable housing projects. So when we talk about reducing the regulatory burden to increase the amount of attainable and affordable housing projects, part of that is getting out of the way. As Tracy said, we know that time is money. And so how do we get out of the way as much as possible and cut that time down to save not just affordable housing developers money, but anyone creating housing so that ultimately it can be more affordable. So next slide, please. A little background first on this. Next slide, Tracy. So this is from the Housing for Fair Charleston report, which was published, I believe, in 2020. And this is showing a comparison between your typical financing formula this is for affordable housing construction. And then when you apply it to Charleston, it's costs a lot more. So land is more costly here. Construction is more costly here. Soft costs, I would say, the developer fee and financing fees, I guess those are the same, but the soft costs, and I might look for Matt here, that would be like the design fees. Yeah. So that box may need to actually be a little bigger based on what we've been learning. But that the soft cost is really where we have influence on that. So the design costs go up, the more criteria, the more board meetings that a team has to go to, the more times they have to revise and resubmit. So that's where we have influence. All of these drive up the amount of gap funding needed. So when we get later into the presentation about how much funding we have coming into our affordable housing fund, we only have so much. And so we have to make hard decisions about where that money goes. And I would also say on that right side, the affordable we're trying to make a property, the more gap funding that is needed. So this is when we talk about reducing the regulatory burden for affordable housing, we're really just trying to cut costs where we can to bring down that gap funding needed and to increase our options for generating more affordable housing supply. Next slide, please.
Could I interject?
Yes.
When that gap funding increases, need increases, whose phone rings first?
Gianna,
Gianna.
then Matt's
They're
second.
always looking for us
Yeah.
to make up the difference.
Right.
So we're costing ourselves money by having the extended review periods.
Very well put. Yes. Yeah, very well put. So this is, I realize this is tiny. The point is not to be able to read every line. This is a list, a sample timeline that we put together with a developer that's affordable housing developer that's new to Charleston, to give them a sort of a pathway to approval. Like, here are all the things that you'll need to do, and in this order. So this is an exhaustive list. His eyes were bugging out of this when we were going over this. And really every time that there's a new line, it's a revise and resubmit. And there are it's not just the length, it's also that there are multiple boards, multiple review processes happening at the same time that aren't necessarily talking to each other. There may be conflicting directives in that. We try and avoid that as much as possible, but that's sort of the process as it currently is for folks. Next slide, please. And this is some information, feedback that we've gotten from affordable housing developer about essentially this process. Charleston's process effectively doubles their design cost, which can be tremendous. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars more, $500,000 potentially, and that's only part of the issue here that we're trying to address. Next slide. So we have several things that we've put in place, trying to have more red carpet, less red tape for those building affordable housing in the city of Charleston. We have what's called priority status. Any development that's building at least, or that's designating at least 50% of their units as affordable, will have access to benefits such as assistance from affordable housing concierge, which is that's myself currently, sort of like about 20% of my time goes to supporting these projects. We have a affordable housing protocol through the technical review committee, which is on the right. It compares, it's a little small, but it compares the review process for if it's affordable housing priority status or if it's market rate. And I think the key ones here is it's a 17-day review period for affordable housing. And for market rate, that can go up to as much as 45 days. So that's significant. And then we also have a red flag follow-up meeting option for affordable housing projects, which those are sort of extra TRC, outside of TRC meetings with the appropriate TRC staff to work through those key issues that are going to keep coming back. And the goal of that is to reduce the amount of times that they need to resubmit, so that the next time they submit their plans, they're better set up for approval. We also have fee waivers for all plan and permit applications and priority agenda placement for our design and architectural review boards. Slide. So we've been hearing that this is working, but we need to do more. It's still long, it's still complicated, it's still confusing. We've established an affordable housing work group with representatives from all of these different boards and review processes. And the metaphor that I've been using with this group is we're trying to squeeze the lemon, as like just to get out all the juice we can. We realize we don't want to compromise on our standards. They're important. We have strict stormwater regulations for a reason. We can't compromise those. We can't make exceptions for affordable housing properties. There's a ton of ethical implications for that. We're not going to go there. We also believe that everybody deserves quality design. So how do we squeeze the lemon where we can to shorten that time period? Next slide. So we our two goals that we'll be measuring toward, next slide, Tracy, is the first one is for affordable and market rate to receive TRC site plan approval after 3 or fewer submittals. So the baseline data is shown here. Currently the average so the time period that this is averaging is from January 2019 to this Monday. The average submittals currently are 3.11 for market rate for all plans, 3.19 for TRC plans with any number of affordable units, and then 3.43 for priority status housing TRC plans. So we want to get this down to 3 or less. And for affordable housing especially, we'd be encouraging that to include a pre-application submittal, which there would be no expectation for approval with that step. That would just be to help them make sure that they're really set up for success when they do come back for their first full submittal to TRC. I'll be adding to that dashboard that you just saw also the average days between submittals. So this is on the regular TRC dashboard that's already on the Innovate website. Shows that this is basically the time period where we don't have control over how long. We're working on understanding better what contributes to that length of time between submittals. So we're going to be doing some interviews with developers to understand better the challenges of our on a more detailed level, the challenges of our review process. And one of the things that we want to understand is what's happening between submittals. Is there something more we can be doing to reduce that time period? Or is it the factors that are totally outside of our control, like waiting for, cost of wood to go down before they, take their next step, or, what are those factors there? Next slide. And then the second goal that we're still working on getting data for, but we will be also wanting to measure the time for final inspection. So not just that initial plan approval to get your permits, your building permits in place, but then from that point, actually going through construction, getting your inspections, and then getting certificate of occupancy. So we want to reduce that time, that final inspection period time by 35%. We don't have the baseline data yet for that. I imagine this goal may fluctuate as we understand the numbers better, but we are working on that. To get the data for that, it's going to require some process improvement and adjustments to workflow. So we're going to have to build some things that we're not currently doing yet to be able to track that accurately. We're also going to be, we've talked about also tracking information like who submits for pre-application, who doesn't, who utilizes the red flag follow-up option, and also site-specific considerations, like is the location in a FEMA floodplain? Is it in a special protection area? Is it under BAR or DRB purview? So we can understand what are these different factors that are contributing to longer or shorter lengths of time, so that we know where to focus our efforts.
Question.
So, Chloe, thank you for this good work. I was going to ask, how much have you been able to measure any time saved already by implementing the red carpet items that you have? It concerned me that, am I right that it's actually taking longer for the project with affordable units than for regular ones?
Yeah, and that does go back to 2019. So if we look at all TRC projects, that has gone down. If we look kind of every year. That's gone down every year, and I think you're going to see the same thing with affordable projects as well. But to your point, I think it'd be great to say, okay, well, when did Chloe start kind of taking that role as concierge, number one? Number two, when did TRC kind of adjust their timeframes for affordable housing projects and look and see, has there been a significant difference? And I think definitely the answer is, there's been a decrease over the years just because there's been a decrease over TRC, but I feel like it might be a little early to come to conclusions.
Yeah.
But I think there is you'll see some change there.
Exactly. The TRC protocol, the more sort of the 17-day review period, red flag follow-up, that wasn't put in place until last year. I want to say summer of last year. So we haven't had any projects that have started with that in place and finished yet. Okay. Once we have more of those examples, then we'll be able to measure how much that has assisted or not. How effective it has been or not.
Wait,
so.
You'll be tracking that.
Yes, we do have that ability. That's another thing too. We didn't have the system in place to track that time period for affordable housing projects compared to market rate until early last year. So it's new data. We're going to have to give it some time to really start learning from it.
So another metric that would seem to be pretty easy to track would be how much money we saved on permit fees and whatever fees that are being charged. It just might be a nice thing to keep a tab on, so we can say at the end of the year we saved affordable developer dollars, in building fee.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think that would be a great thing to track. I'm going to write a note about that. Also, something that has come up in the affordable housing work group is part of the challenges that we know staff capacity is an issue across the city, but that is really contributing to the longer review period. When we really have sort of a bottleneck issue, it's usually because of staff capacity being understaffed. And our fees, our permit plan application fees are supporting staff, but the budget for staff. So one of the things that's been discussed or brought up from the affordable housing work group is there, and I'm just delivering a message. I'm not making any recommendations. I'm just elevating something from that group. Is it worth talking about maybe increasing fees for some projects to offset that? Because we also need more funding for staff in order to really cut these times down in the way that we need to. So that's a challenge, a balance.
To that point, yesterday at our budget ad hoc committee meeting, Robert presented for the planning department and included a full-time position for the concierge, number one, but also we have all fees coming back to the budget ad hoc, not just for planning, but throughout the city to evaluate any fees that we feel appropriate to raise for next year. So we will be looking at that before the end of the year.
Really? Exciting stuff.
Good work.
Yeah. And last but not least, just back from vacation.
All right, so I'm going to be covering two metrics today. Next slide, Tracy. So the first one is around affordable housing created and preserved, and the number of units that we're creating. So next slide. The number we've all been talking about for months now, 16,351 affordable housing units that need to be created by 2030 if we're going to address affordability gaps in our city. We all know that this is a huge number for us to get to. It's going to take a lot of different factors, resources, working on our permitting and review time, just increasing development in general in the city in order for us to get close to that. And we also know that the greatest need for affordable housing in our city is amongst those that are at the lowest incomes. So there are 7,000 low-income housing units that are needed just to meet our current needs. So we know this is the big number that we've been working towards since our city plan came out, I guess, a year and a half ago. Since that time, rents are going up. Housing prices have gone up, I believe, even though they're starting to come down now. And wages have gone up, but not by as much. So that number that we've been focused on is probably larger. Next slide. So a lot of work has been done in terms of the city working towards being able to track this information. Earlier this year, we released an affordable housing dashboard that a lot of city staff put a lot of hard work into across different departments. And what this does is show where all of the existing affordable housing is in our city, where all of the proposed affordable housing is located, and information with each of those projects. Then also shows information regarding where our HUDs are, where we're expecting a certain percentage of affordable housing to be created once those projects start to move forward. I linked to the dashboard so we can click through it a little bit. And for anyone that's listening online, this is available on the city website. It's updated on a nightly basis, and it's being pulled up right now by Tracy. And what it basically does is works through our kind of back-end system on InterGov to allow us to track each project that is active in the development process, provides specific information about that project in terms of the income levels that are being met with the different units in the project, the type of project it is, if it's senior housing, housing for people who are experiencing homelessness, et cetera. It also shows information regarding location and if it's a LIHTC project, how much city subsidy is being provided into that development. And also the affordability period. So whether it's a project that's going to have those affordable units there for 30 years, for perpetuity, or for some other specified amount. At the bottom of our screen here, we have a number of different charts that provide information regarding when we're expecting these affordable housing developments to be completed. We also have the number of affordable housing units that have been created by each year. The affordable housing units by region, looking at Daniel Island, James Island, Johns Island, Peninsula, and West Ashley. Multifamily or single family developments, AMI levels that are being captured, and funding that's been put forward into those projects. And you'll see at the right, we've taken that number of the 16,351 affordable housing units that are needed by 2030, and we show our existing number of affordable housing units in the city. So there's roughly 5,500 that we have currently. And we have 704 affordable housing units that are active right now. And these are largely projects that have been supported through our affordable housing bond, which was approved in 2017, provides $20 million and going to a variety of projects throughout the city. So you see, between the existing proposed units and what we have remaining, we still have a gap by 2030 of 15,647 units. So that's a lot.
But it's less than 16,351.
That's right. And I'll also note that when we originally launched this dashboard this spring, we actually had more proposed units on the pie chart. We had one of our developments that we were supporting, unable to move forward. So we're actually, in the last 6 months, we're moving backwards. So that's kind of segues into the second part of my presentation is affordable housing is really dependent upon funding being available. And we know that in speaking with developers who are interested to pursue affordable housing developments in the city of Charleston, this is different than in other areas of the state. They really need local support in order to make that project happen. Charleston land prices are too high. So in order just to get into the market, that gap is going to exist on any developer's capital stack. So as a city, we utilize any funding source that we can get our hands on in order to fill that gap. And thanks to Mayor Tecklenburg and the council, through both the affordable housing bond and through our mixed-use workforce housing fee in lieu, we've been able to have a funding source available to meet the needs, to enable these projects to move forward. So again, those funds go towards the financing gap on a project. And we also use it to acquire land that allows the city to then put out an RFP, identify a development partner in order to bring them in and develop the affordable housing on that site. Again, 16,351 affordable homes needed. These funds go towards meeting this goal. Slide. And it's costly to do this. So we analyzed 7 of the most recent affordable housing developments that we've supported in the city, looking at what our average contribution is to facilitate the creation of one affordable housing unit. And over recent months, last few years, we have these rising costs of construction and rising costs to acquire land. And our average contribution is roughly $60,000 just to create one affordable housing unit in the city of Charleston. That number, I analyzed it maybe 6 months or maybe 9 months ago. It was more like 30,000. And it's because we have all these projects that we have supported that are coming back to us for additional funding because, again, rising costs of construction and then some other issues at the state level in terms of their state tax credits that they've been expecting to receive. Next slide. And this just
doubled in the last 6 months or what?
Yeah. Well, and it's likely going to increase. Yeah. So this breaks it down. I mentioned those recent 7 projects. And you can see what our average contribution has been per unit. The funding sources that we're putting towards the project, the total amounts, where these projects are located, and this is just costly business. You can, if you look at the sources, you can see that we're utilizing a variety of sources in order to make a project happen. So, as an example, our low-lying housing development, we're utilizing fee and lieu, we're utilizing bond funds, and we're utilizing TIF funds.
And Matt, for those not familiar with these projects, these are like lower income housing, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
These are all
60% and below.
right. These are all low income housing tax credit projects, meaning that they're
Below 80.
Below 60.
60. Yeah. And with the LIHTC program, you can do an income average now between 30 and 80%, but most typically are providing at 60%. So this chart, it's probably difficult to read, but basically shows where we stand today in terms of our different funding sources, what our current balance is, and what we're projecting to receive over the next 5 years. Again, I mentioned this before, the fee in lieu, it's been really important in order for us to support affordable housing creation in the city of Charleston. And we've tried to project out based off of when certain projects may finish and the fees that we're expecting to kind of map out what we're going to be able to bring in over those next 5 years. What's also important to note is that the mixed-use workforce housing zoning district is confined to a certain geographic area, and over time, the number of rezonings in that area is going to really dwindle. So we need to identify additional sources.
Go back, one more time for just a second. I realize there's 3 columns here. And the settlement with the funds from Charleston Place.
It's the UDAG settlement with the LBC.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yep. And so here we really just aggregate what we saw in that last chart. Our current balance is roughly 15 million. We have projects that have already been, we have funds dedicated towards roughly 6.5. So, over the next 5 years, we expect to bring in roughly $27 million. Next slide. And the metric that we've been tracking is specifically around the Affordable Housing Fund. So looking at our franchise fee, our fee in lieu. And this is going to vary over each year based off of these rezonings. 300,000 coming in through franchise fee in lieu. We brought in 189,000 so far. Potentially another project might reach their CO by the end of the year, which would mean another 766,000. Then you can see the funds over the next few years going into the Affordable Housing Fund.
So Matt, but based off the last slide, we know we have enough funding to basically support at today's dollar, like 450 units?
500.
Yeah. Out of the 15,000.
Yeah, so go to the next slide.
Sounds like we need more money.
Okay, 600.
Oh, okay.
So between now and 2026, with the projected funds that we'd be bringing in,
Sorry, I'm ahead.
you're good. That would be an additional 600 homes. We also have our rezonings where we've recently increased the fees on the fee in lieu. So we're hopeful that that will result in affordable housing units being included at the project site. And then we also have the rental assistance demonstration program, which we'll expect to receive additional affordable housing units. So the Housing Authority will likely seek funds from the city in order to make these projects move forward. We also have existing affordable housing units that have their affordability restrictions expiring. And so you do all the math, and we still have a gap of roughly 14,600 units in 2026. Next slide. And this gives a visual representation of that. This is slightly off because of a couple recent changes to a couple of projects, including one being completed. But roughly, you can see that yellow shaded area. A few years from now, 2026, still very large. So it's our goal to figure out how do we continue to shrink that, identify additional funding sources to meet this end goal of the 16,351. That's all I had.
That's a pretty big challenge you left us with. So y'all, I apologize, I gotta run off for another meeting. I think it's clear we gotta identify more funding sources. I think we need to consider another housing bond. We had an audit report day before yesterday that said city finances are in as good a shape as they've ever been. I mean, we can afford to borrow some money, I'm convinced. So we got to figure that out and get council support to do that. But the other thing is that I'm just convinced that when we do our whole zoning code update, we've got to create more, I guess you'd say opportunity, maybe one, or requirement similar to MU, where to folks to build in the city of Charleston, they've got to include, I know we can't do it inclusionary, it has to be somehow finagled to be incentive based. But if that means reducing the entitlement citywide of what people can build so that they have to come back to us for an incentive and requirement to do affordable, I think something like that is needed in order to impact these numbers, because we can't do it by ourselves. We need people that are out there developing product to be a part of the solution. And I hadn't come up with a better idea than that to try to make that happen.
Mayor, I wanted to get down here to say exactly what you just said. When we look at the amount of development that has occurred in our community, literally if a percentage of all of that development off of Main Road on Johns Island and West Ashley were affordable housing or workforce
We'd
housing,
be getting there.
this would not be as hard
That's right.
as it is
That's
right
what we
now.
got to do.
Absolutely.
So with that said, I want to thank you all. And even though there are not a lot of people here, y'all have encouraged me. Government is working here for Charleston, and I love this effort of thinking about our measurements and our metrics, because it is informing our decisions. Think about what just happened here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let them know that at Harvard.
Any other questions for Matt? Now that we're like 14,600. Yeah.
A question, and it could also be but for you're talking about the mixed use. For shrinking, or am I understanding that correctly? And how to explain that real quick?
Yeah, so the mixed use workforce housing zoning district is largely the main King Street corridor of the peninsula. Is over time, as it's been being redeveloped, the number of opportunities to, it's shrinking. So over time, the amount of funds that we'll expect to put into the affordable housing fund will decrease just based on that.
I think that's why the mayor said it needs to be citywide and not just in one little small area.
Right.
All right, well, good stuff. Thanks everybody for being online in attendance as well, and hope everyone has an awesome Thursday. Thank you so much.
Thank you.